Okay. So we're waiting for a small video from the...
საქართველოს ინოვაციების და ტექნოლოგიების სააგენტო მსოფლიო ბანკის მხარდაჭერით ახორციელებს პროექტს ინტერნეტი განვითარებისთვის, რომლის მიზანია რეგიონში მცხოვრები მოსახლეობის და მეწარმეების მხარდაჭერა, მათი ჩართვა ციფრულ სამყაროში.
ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანია ქვეყანაში ციფრული ეკონომიკის განვითარება, რომლის ფარგლებშიც სააგენტო ახორციელებს უფასო ტრენინგებს ციფრულ წიგნიერებაში, ელექტრონულ ბიზნესში, რაც მოიცავს კომპიუტერის, ინტერნეტის ეფექტურ გამოყენებას, ასევე ელექტრონულ კომერციას, სოციალური ქსელების მართვას და სხვა მნიშვნელოვან საკითხებს, რაც ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანია ბიზნესის განვითარებისათვის.
ინტერნეტი ეს არის ამოუწურავი ტექნოლოგიური საბადო, რომელსაც უდიდესი რესურსი გააჩნია და ვინც სწორად იყენებს მას, ნედლეულსაც ის მოიპოვებს. ნედლეული კი ამ შემთხვევაში არის დამატებითი შემოსავალი, რომლის მიღებაც ინტერნეტის მეშვეობით ყველა მეწარმეს შეუძლია.
ძალიან გამიხარდა რომ გავიგი ამ პროექტის შესახებ, რადგან არც ერთ ტურისტულ კომპანიასთან არ ვქონდა ჩვენ არანაირი კავშირი, საერთოდ არაფერი და უბრალოდ ვღებულობდით ტურისტებს მხოლოდ გამგებლებს. ჩავერთე უშუალოდ მე იმისთვის, რომ გავაცნოთ ჩვენი სფერო, რომელიც არის ტრადიციული ხელსაქმე მთელ მსოფლიოს.
იმისათვის, რომ კავშირი გავაბათ სხვადასხვა ქვეყნის მრგველებთან ტურიზმში, ვასწავლიან ახლა როგორ ჩავერთოთ ამ ინტერნეტ სივრცეში.
ვცდილობ, რომ ტრენინგზე მიღებული გამოსწორებები პრაქტიკაში გამოვიყენო და უკვე მაქვს შედეგი.
ნებისმიერ დაინტერესებულ პირს, ნებისმიერ რეგიონში შეუძლია ჩაერთოს ამ ინიციატივაში, გააცნოს თავისი პროდუქტი და მომსახურება მსოფლიოს და აითვისოს ახალი ბაზრები.
ქართულ პროდუქტს და ქართულ მეწარმეებს საკმაოდ დიდი პოტენციალი გააჩნიათ და დროა რომ ეს პოტენციალი სრულად გამოავლინონ. ინტერნეტი კი სწორედ ეს ადგილია.
So with these very impressive keynote speeches, let me introduce first myself. My name is Mariam Sulaberidze. I'm representing Georgian National Communications Commission, independent regulatory authority that regulates electronic communications as well as broadcasting sectors of Georgia. So I'll be moderating today a very important session with the name of bridging the digital gap, community or commercial networks. I also would like to introduce my co-moderator, Natalia Saginashvili, who is the researcher from Small and Medium Telecom Operators Association of Georgia. So this session is very important and we have very distinguished panelists here. And with these words, let me introduce our distinguished guests. So Mr. Georgi Cherkezishvili, Deputy Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia. Mr. Mikhail Boni, the member of European Parliament, the former Minister of Digitalization of Poland. Welcome, Mr. Boni. Mr. Raul Echeverria, the Vice President of Global Integration of Internet Society. Ms. Capello Gaspar, the Director of Public Policy of ETNO. And last but not least, Meletil. Sorry, Meletil. So the digital policy advisor of VION. So first, our distinguished guests will share their experience with the development of broadband in rural and urban areas, and after we will move to the audience with their questions. Now, Mr. Deputy Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the being in Georgia, and this is really very honored for us, and we are expecting that you will enjoy the time in Tbilisi. For the government perspective, was the goal of when we are talking about this perspective of the government, how it should be involved in the broadband development. There are different aspects. The first is like within the country, to divide this distance between to digitalize these rural areas and then to connect the different places within the country. But also it's very important to play a key role for the government and the country to promote your country and for the globally, to connect the different regions in the world. So this is two major directions what the government of Georgia is working in what we are doing in this respect. As it was mentioned, we started in 2016 development of the broadband infrastructure in the country, and under the Ministry of Economy we established a special dedicated agency and in the company who is responsible for the development of the infrastructure in the rural areas, especially where it's not commercially viable and where no private sector has an interest to be participating to spend money in this part. And on the other hand, they are where the population lives more than 200 persons. And moreover, all the social part, what we talked today on this beginning of this panel of these rural areas, especially in the high mountains, where we have population less than 200 inhabitants. So this is a part where it's very important government to support, government to promote, and then to create a demand. Because without this, it's impossible to develop the economy and to spread development of the economy and then to give this chance to the all members of the society.
Oh, thank you. So, Mr. Boni, as we know, the European institutions are supporting development of the broadband very much. Could you please share your experience in that?
You know, I can share my two kinds of experiences. Firstly, when I was the Minister of Digitization, and we have decided some years ago to prepare Digital Poland, the very comprehensive program focused on building the infrastructure, but on the other hand, focused on building the new digital literacy. Because I think that it is very important when we are talking about overcoming those digital gaps. I think that we need to start with broad activity on the digital literacy. It's important for the young generation because young people are very often focused on entertainment, not ready to take digital skills and go to the workplace. And on the other hand, to the elderly generation, it's very, very important. In the perspective of 2025, I think that 90% of jobs will be touched by digital issues. So if we want to have a labor market very modern and adjusted to the challenges, we need to work on this digital literacy area. Secondly, you have mentioned the question of demand. I think that when we are talking especially about rural areas, it's important to put the question if it is possible to establish the demand, to show to the people that new digital public services and the new possibilities for the future healthcare area, for example, and the new possibilities for SMEs development related to using ICT tools can create the good background for the new demand, because it will be the good pressure for investments. And the third point is related to investment and the proper environment for investment. I think that we need to consider how to incentivize investments. It's important for the European Union, but it's important in every place, all over the world, in Georgia, in neighborhood countries, in Balkan countries. How to make it? We need to be much more open for giving the certainty for the business to make the long-term investments. It's crucial because when we are looking at the rural areas, for example, it's not so easy to say, okay, I will invest, and in the perspective of 5 years, I will have the return of the investments. Not. So if it should be the long-term investment, so I think that we need to join the perspective of digital literacy, the perspective of creating the demand, and the perspective of environment, proper environment, open environment for business investment. And the last point, in many rural areas, I think that we need to involve communities. The question is if the contribution of the communities to some investment is some kind of donation or if it should be also based on the business rules. So I think that it's a very important topic for our discussion.
So as we move to the community networks, Mr. Echeverri, could you please share your experience because...
Hello? Wow, it's working. Thank you for the opportunity of participating in this panel. I think that's building over what the other distinguished colleagues have said before. What we are seeing now in the world is that there is a huge gap of opportunities between the people that is already connected and the people that is not connected yet. And the world is working under the assumption that everybody is connected. All the things we do every day that are very normal for us, like buying a ticket for a concert or paying a bill or checking our bank account or sending messages to our relatives, is something that is only available for half of the global population. And so it is urgent to connect the people that is not connected. I think that everybody understands and everybody agree on the importance of connecting the people that is not connected. I think that's what sometimes we don't fully agree in the sense of urgency. And this is the basis of our strategy, because we continue supporting and promoting enabler environments for developing the markets and the growing of markets around the world, especially in developing countries. But what we are doing so far is not enough. So we need to find complementary strategies for connecting the people that's not connected yet. And so we need, in few words, to think out of the box on this. The community networks approach is just one of those things that we can do, innovative things that we can do. And the presentation from Mr. Ratin about the Tusceti project was impressive, and so I don't need to say very much. And we are learning from these kind of experiences, at least I would say three things. One thing is that the technologies for connecting the unconnected already exist, are available. He spoke about that. Second things, and he also mentioned that, is that the community is key. It's not just bringing wires to the villages or towns, it's working with the communities, empowering the communities, working with them to find together what are the ways in which they can take advantage of the technology for improving their lives. That this is the ultimate objective. And the third thing is that the regulatory framework and legal framework should be a catalyzer, not an obstacle for access. And we are very happy to partner with the Georgian government here, because it makes things much easier when the government and the regulator and all the authorities understand the importance of connecting the people. So imagine all the technology innovation we will see in the near future. If people is not able to access the things that already exist now, how they will take advantage of all the innovation we will see in the coming years. So it is urgent. And so for doing this, for achieving really this, we need to align all the different policies and different components of the strategy. We have to continue working for enabler markets, helping the market to grow, bringing investment from private companies, but also align this with the broadband strategies, the international organizations strategies for investment, like our colleague from the World Bank presented, and also universal access funds. We have a lot of tools available, and we need to align all of them in order to escalate this thing, because we, as the Internet Society, are very proud of the work we do, but we will not connect 3 billion people just deploying community networks by ourselves. Even the fact that our community around the world, like here in Georgia, is great, but connecting 3 billion is very much. So we need to escalate this, and to escalate this, we need to turn these kind of initiatives in public policies and aligning all the components of the strategy. So this is our call to the community. Think out of the box, embrace innovative approaches for connectivity. We are showing one of these that's involving the community, empowering the community is key for really connecting the people that's not connected. Thank you.
Now we're moving to the private sector.
Okay, I'm on. Good morning. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you to EuroDiG to bring this topic to the discussion. We couldn't agree more. Access is what really empowers people. We see in this very inspiring example here in Georgia how the life of people really dramatically changes. So, and we totally agree that we work on the assumption and discuss many matters on the assumption that everybody is connected. That's not true. There's a lot to be done. If we go back to the title of our session, Bridging the Urban-Rural Digital Gap, a commercial or a community effort, we believe it's both. We know that the resources are scarce. In 2016, the European Commission issued a communication where it identified that there would be a need for 5 billion euros to actually achieve the new gigabit society goals. And it also said that if we continue to invest at the same pace that we've been doing now, we are going to miss at least 155 billion, and we are not going to meet these targets. Also, according to the same text, 95% of this investment is coming from traditional telecom operators. So we need to see that the revenues of these companies, because of the increasing competition, it's of course a good thing, but also because of a lot of regulation, have been decreasing year to year. So their capacity to invest has also been going down, and the resources of public states are also not unlimited. So we really need to see how we need to actually increase the reach of the traditional investors as well. So there are three main hurdles that we see here to actually boost the investment of operators. One is the technology neutrality. The other one is promoting all investment models and the reduction of administrative costs for all. When we're talking about technologies, and then I go back to the point also made by Raoul, I mean, we have the mobile technology, we have the satellite, we have several fixed technologies, and all of these should be taken into account. Of course, we do not want to create citizens of a first category that have the best speeds and cities of a second category, but we cannot just invest on the top networks, otherwise we really not reach all the regions. We need to do this on a phased basis, and this is really important. The same applies to investment models. There are countries where you have individual investments, other countries you have commercial operators coming together and have joint projects like Portugal or France, and in some other countries like Sweden, you have municipalities that actually take the lead in many regions. So the investment from all these traditional players is also essential to make sure that we arrive to better connectivity for all. In any case, there will be always regions where we need specific targeted solutions, and there's where public investment and solutions like community networks come into place in targeted areas to meet specific community needs. With this engagement of the communities, we see that this is a very interesting solution. Thirdly, again, on the talking about the barriers, where we need to look into the administrative hurdles. We have public authorities taking too long to grant permits. Many of these permits are very often costly, rights of way, spectrum licenses, etc. And we need faster and better procedures to help the private sector, the communities, to actually bring connectivity to people. We understand that there are administrative constraints, and of course there are interests, public interests, to be safeguarded, but this can always be tackled. So we can do more if we improve this, all these issues, but there will always be regions that require the specific and targeted solutions. So I will stop here and leave for the rest.
Yes, let me check. Is it working? No. Yes? No? No? You want it? Yes? Okay, great. Thanks. So let me, it's a great pleasure to be speaking here at EuroDiG on behalf of VEON. So one short sentence about VEON, because it's one of the big unknowns. So we are a global telecommunication provider with 240 million customers globally. So we have the largest operations in Italy and in Ukraine. Here in Georgia, we operate the telecommunications brand Beeline. And I think how I would like to start, maybe a bit unconventional for private sector, is to say that we don't really do enough. We could do more. But I think we face, especially with these smaller type of pilot projects, we face the issue of how do we embed that within our global operations or continuing operations. I think this is an issue that we face also on the international community level, that we have great pilot projects, but how do we scale them to a sustainable level? So I think on the connectivity part, we invest a lot. And we have great coverage with regard to 4G. So here in Georgia, actually, we went from 2G to 4G. We now have a coverage of 90%. In Italy, we will invest 6 billion over the next 5 years to improve connectivity. We have now 4G coverage of 95%. By the end of this year, that will be 98%. So we're almost at 100, but not really there yet. And in Ukraine, we recently invested 133 million in our licenses to launch 4G. So this was in February. So we're kind of continuing the process of getting people connected. Now, that remains a lot of people who are still unconnected, and we see that across our footprint. And I would like to go over a bit of a case study that we have in Italy, where we see kind of a great combination of the different team players coming together to create connectivity in rural areas. So in Italy, the government has launched a national universal broadband plan to achieve the European targets of 100% coverage of 30 MB per second. Now, the Italian government has split the country into 4 different type of segments. And the 4th segment, that's the most interesting part, because that's actually covering 9 million people it's 15% of the country, which will not be able to get connected through private sector means. So to connect those people in rural areas, to give you kind of the numbers wise, it would cost about 70 euros a month to make these people connected to the internet, which is very unsustainable, because if we look at our revenue, this is not even profit, but revenue per customer, it's 27 euro. So there's a huge gap that we need to kind of fill to make it sustainable for these people to get online. Now, there's been a very innovative approach in Italy, and that's actually the Open Fiber project. And this is not led by a telecommunications operator, but we, together with Vodafone, have partnered with Enel, so it's the energy provider, using the electricity infrastructure that is already there to put fiber infrastructure, and that can be fiber to the home, but also the fiber backhaul, so that we in the end can reach the people through 4G. I think this is important because it's not about only connecting the people in these rural areas, but actually meaningfully connecting these people, because we have seen in Ukraine, for example, people are still on internet using 2G, but I don't think this is what we want in the future. So to connect the people through the existing infrastructure, it would reduce the cost actually to a bit under 30 euros. So that actually brings it much closer to what we could achieve as a private sector. So how it works is that it's an open fiber network where telecom operators have a wholesale pricing to provide in the end customers with connectivity. I think this shows how, in very unconventional ways, not only driven by the telecommunications sector, but also looking more broadly trying to fill the pieces together, we can actually have a big impact on people everywhere. And this is something we'll be looking at this model to implement in Ukraine as well. Still a bit of discussion. And it's important to mention this is not only private sector funded, but it was a reverse auction by the Italian government, supported also by the European Commission. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing this very interesting experience. So before moving to the audience with their questions, just let me ask one question related to even the title of our today's session, community or commercial networks. Marta, you've mentioned that they are both community and commercial, but in some cases, community networks are perceived as competitors to the commercial networks. From your point of view, are they competitive or do they complement each other? So.
I don't think there's a single answer to that question. It really depends on the concrete case. Community networks, if you have really projects driven by communities, targeted to certain communities, to specific areas, they do not necessarily need to compete or to have to be a threat to the commercial telecom operators. It really depends on the situation. Of course, we also face all this technology neutrality, administrative burdens, and then if you have a double standard in an area that could be commercially viable, if these hurdles are not there, then maybe this is not really a community network, it's something else. So what we cannot say, it's not black and white. there are many shades, but the point is really that we see community networks as a creative solution, driven by communities to fill in the gaps. But the issue is how we define this gap.
Thank you. So I would like also to mention we have also remote participants. If any questions, just let us know. Okay. So I would like to open the floor to the audience for their questions. Okay.
Thank you. It's Walid Al-Sakaf, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Internet Society. So I also take this opportunity to say, as the board, we are really delighted with the Tusceti project and feel that this is in line with the vision of ISOC of providing and helping make the internet for everyone. One point I'd like to raise, and this is open to everyone here, is that the fact that the internet itself is built on a multi-stakeholder approach. So there are many different elements, many different players. Governments are one, and they are a more dominant one. But there's now an increasing need to bring in more of the private sector in developing countries, not only in Europe, but across the board. And I see this as an opportunity to bring in more international collaboration between projects such as Tusceti and other projects around the world that need these. And some parts of it can be done through the private sector and with, of course, connecting with the communities. So how do you think this could model well in bringing it as an example through cross-collaboration with different parts of the world?
First of all, thank you very much for this question, because this is a very crucial point for the countries like Georgia, because of the density of the geographically, it's when we have such a regions, the high mountain regions. This is very important. And the question also for whether this is of the communities or the commercial part, it should be both. And whether maybe there will be challenges when these community areas will be developed economically, then this commercial interest will be more there. But without these networks, it will be impossible to develop. And then this is crucial for the government side, because we need to not to duplicate, but to use this like the model for other regions as well. And this is very important for us.
I think that collaboration across different actors is crucial for this. So in fact, I cannot imagine a different way to achieve our goals. We can deploy community networks, but we need somebody to provide backhaul connectivity. We need the government to provide the conditions that are appropriate for the ISPs to develop their services, to deploy their services. So we need innovative ways to access to frequencies, to build the community network. So we need everybody on board. We need the regulator, we need the government, we need the private companies, we need the community-based organizations. So without the participation of everybody, we cannot achieve the goals. And this is why, answering the previous question that you made, I don't see this as a competition between community-based projects and private organizations. I think that there is a perfect opportunity, win-win opportunity. In fact, we had plans for deploying community networks in some countries where we canceled those plans because the private companies started to provide services in those areas. Meaningful services, of course, because what the colleague has pointed out is very important. That it's not just bringing access, it's bringing meaningful access. So if the private sector is providing meaningful access to those communities, there is no need to deploy community networks. So this is absolutely complementary. And we need to, this is coming back to my previous point, we need to align all the strategies and policies that are in place in order to achieve the goal of connecting everybody. So collaboration is essential for this.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
My opinion is that it should be complementary, because when we are looking at two separated stages, the phase of investments, it's clear that communities can invest, but after that, I think that during the process of using the internet, access to many new services, I think that it's better to have some kind of partnership. So common goal and partnership between community and business which is ready to lead the business and to look at some requirements. So complementary, but partnership, I think, is the best solution.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think that's exactly a great point, because even if we look at the use side, I mean, it's a whole different discussion, but I'd like to highlight this part that even though we have that 95% 4G connectivity availability in Italy, only 66%, so that's 2/3 of our customer base, is actually using the internet. So there's a huge gap of 30% where we actually need to enable the people to see the value of the internet, and that's something that we need to do together with the community, that's for sure. But on the activity part itself, also, I think there's still some, the government can still do a lot. So tech neutrality, what you mentioned, so we're still locked in Ukraine to upgrade 2G to 4G. Network sharing in some countries, that's a great opportunity to reduce the cost. And also working with different type of partners that we usually don't think of, because the low-hanging fruit is to also know where actually are the rural communities that are easily accessible. So GSMA is doing a great project together with Facebook and the operators to look at the map, overlaying that with satellite imagery of where are the communities that are currently not covered, but that could actually be easily covered. Because currently we're depending on census data of governments to identify where are kind of the communities to connect. So also there we can have great innovation.
Okay. Thank you very much. So. I have one more question. So MP Boni mentioned the importance of the awareness in broadband development and also social responsibility. So my question is to the Deputy Minister, what are the social responsibilities or the initiatives of government to stimulate the demand side in Georgia?
This is also another very important topic when we are talking about the communities. When we say the communities, they are not just geographical communities. Yeah, we have another type of the themes, and in some part of the people within the next to living together with us is that they needed different types of the service and it's for support. Like we have this project of the visually impaired people's project in Tbilisi and in Georgia, where we, Ministry of Economy, with the cooperation of our Innovation Technology Agency and with the Korean government, we provide this service to these people, and after that we will have on the final. I will ask colleagues if it is possible to give some, to show this some very brief video about this community, how they live. At this moment we have around 25,000 beneficiaries in this center, and this is very important that to have access to these people, for these people to use these modern technologies and these digital parts as well. So. This is crucial, and then we need to spread this in other parts of the countries as well.
Okay, thank you. From your experience, from the Polish experience, what are the other possibilities to somehow to stimulate and increase the demand? There are some examples there.
You know, when we are going in the direction of e-governance, for example, which is very important for citizens, and on the other hand, it's supporting the democracy development. Because, for example, all consultation could be transparent with participation of citizens. So if the government is going in this direction, so I think it's step by step creating the new model of citizens' activities. And this is the demand. When we are trying to change the healthcare area system, and probably in 5 years, we will change the paradigm of healthcare system using all those new technologies, making the possibilities to measure the state of health in the real time and send information to our doctors. It's very, very important. So it creates the new attitude among patients, people as patients, consumers as patients. So I think that there are many, many instruments to create this new demand, but it requires, I think, the comprehensive and holistic view. What does it mean, internet, in the second wave of digital revolution? That this is not only communication, there are many, many new possibilities for services oriented at citizens. And if the governments and local governments will go in this direction, so I think it will be clear that the demand will grow. And we need to add also, especially the digital literacy, but especially to the elderly people. Because in Poland we have had a big project addressed to elderly people with participation of young volunteers, teaching elderly people in small villages, in small cities, how to use the internet. And it was unbelievable, yes, because those people were much more open, elderly people. And I think that we need to give them the possibilities. Now, unfortunately, we have in the European Union just about 60 million people not using the internet, just between 16 and 74 years. So much more of them are over 50s, over 60s. So I think this is also the challenge. It's important when we will go in the direction of changing the healthcare area, because it will touch elderly people much more than younger generations. So this is the challenge for government to join all those perspectives and to have digital strategy for citizens.
Thank you. So I still have some questions, but any okay.
What are the benefits of community network compared to the public network in case of access and coverage?
Could you repeat the question?
So public network and compared to community network, what are the benefits of the community network?
So the public networks and difference between public networks and the community networks. So what the difference between these two? Maybe Raul. Okay.
I think that's networks are networks. So what is important is to connect the people. So in some countries, the state has a more important role than in others. depending on different views of the governments and the society. So we can see in some countries that the government run their own services. In other countries, they have an absolutely opposite view, and they prefer to create the best conditions for private sector to invest and to deploy their services. Are different options, different flavors. Something that I have learned in my life is that there is not one single solution for this, and I love one TED Talk that I have seen many times that the speaker says, no matter that one thing is true, that very probably the opposite is also true. So the thing that the important is connecting people. But I fully agree with what Mr. Boni said with regard to that people need to understand how the technologies can fit their needs. And connectivity infrastructure is just one of the drivers. The availability of infrastructure, I should say, is one of the drivers of connectivity. The other driver is that people need to be connected. And for that, they need to understand how they can use technologies. We have seen a lot of examples, for example, in rural areas of India, where people is using now the internet access for deploying the local businesses, for providing services to the neighbors, to access e-governance services. This is e-government is one of the very meaningful contents that people can access. And the Tusheti is a good example of how they can promote their tourism-based businesses. So this is how the people will see the benefits of being connected. Sustainable Development Goals provides us a good basis for understanding this. And so we don't need just to go to the policymakers to talk about connectivity. We can talk to them about how we have to bring education to everybody, everywhere, how to bring telemedicine services to everybody, everywhere, how to promote the creation of new jobs and empowering women in different places. And just my last comment is that it's not only about rural areas. One of our projects on community networks is in Kibera. Kibera is in Nairobi, in the capital of Kenya. So it's not a rural area, it's in the city, but Kibera is one of the biggest slums in the world. So this is not only for rural areas. It's a last point. One thing that has been floating here around is affordability. It's not only the capacity of bringing services, bringing connectivity to the people, but it should be also affordable. So it's a meaningful access. People have to understand how they can use the technologies for the benefit, but also the access should be affordable. So all the things, coming back to the question, I don't distinguish between public and community networks. They are just networks.
Thank you. Olivier, your question?
Yeah, thank you. Olivier Crépin-Leblanc from the English chapter of the Internet Society, but I'll be speaking in my own name and I'll be a little controversial. Not necessarily the things that I think about, but two questions really. The first one is to do with the community networks and the number of community networks that are out there. In the early days of the Internet, we saw quite a few community networks being put together and then those being replaced by commercial undertakings when the area became well served. Now, we don't have that many community networks out there, and I wondered why this was the case. Whether it's something about regulation that doesn't allow community networks, is it a technical problem, is it a problem of funding for these, or is it a problem of demand? And that's when I asked the second part of the question, which is, if it's a problem of there is no demand for these, I mean, we've got 3G, we've got 4G, we're now so well served out there, are we not just wasting time with community networks? Now, that's just meant to be provocative.
So let me take that. So I think the main answer there is I think the community networks are great when the markets are clearly failing. And I think there, especially in the early days when you saw internet was very expensive, now if you look in, let's say, here in Georgia, but also in Ukraine, you pay around €2 a month for a big data bundle that you can usually live by. So I think in cases where the market can clearly not serve, especially in the rural areas, in specific cases, then it's very valuable. Otherwise, I think the private sector is pretty good at serving the needs of the customers. Also because in community networks, a lot of people have to take an active role themselves, and maybe you rather outsource that to someone else, pay a little bit extra. I do see a trend, maybe it's a little bit different track, but in Australia, in Rwanda, and now also in Mexico, about kind of the government wholesale networks rollout. So maybe you see kind of, maybe not from community decentralized, but back centralized to government-led initiatives. Not so sure how successful that will be. We've seen how it went bad in Australia. So I think that's kind of a dynamic that we see as well, related to your question.
Would you like to add something, Meta?
Yeah, indeed, I would just echo what Mela told us. We believe that the market should be able to fulfill the needs of the many. Then there may be a few that, for geographic reasons, for low affordability, that would be always like at the margins, can be left out, and there can be a role. Again, and I said before, we need to actually define what that gap is, and ensure that there is fair competition amongst all the market players, and that public funding is also not distorting competition. But again, I would just, on the economics of the issue, I would just like to underline, in the Touchetti presentation, we saw that the cost of the connection would be equivalent to a tourist per night. So they are creating their own economics, they are creating their own demand, and maybe in a few years you'll have more users, more people are going to be there, and then you can have a more commercial-based operation. So there is a role, maybe, just to spur it up, and then things get into the traditional services track, maybe.
But if I properly understood, the presentation of Touchetti experience was a fantastic example of cooperation and partnership. All partners were involved, yes, and they took the responsibility for some issues. And probably it created the possibility to invest in the proper way, to give to the people the access to the network, but on the other hand, to make it affordable. So with prices which were open and accessible to created accessibility to the people. So I think that the model of partnership is one of the key issues, and there is no one model. Because we are talking about the lack and the deficit of accessibility in rural areas just about 20 years. My question is, if we will go in the direction of 5G, how to invest, how to organize partnership, how to be open for co-investment model, which are discussing now, to give to the people in the rural areas the new possibility. Because if you will lose the fight for full accessibility to all people, also to people from rural areas, from rural residents, when we will go in the direction of 5G, it will be the collapse, yes? Because the opportunity of 5G is to give the equal accessibility to network and the accessibility to all services to all people.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay. As a runner of the community network, let me answer the question, which was a very good question. Actually, we are thinking, of course, about the commercialization and why we stepped in, right? So, to say, I mean, as an economist, we can say that there is a market failure. Right? Then we step in. This is a case why we came in. For example, about 15 years ago, the mobile coverage and mobile was deployed in Touchetti But since that, there is no development. For example, some gorges, we are left without any internet coverage and without any connection. So for these 15 years, and we do not see any development for the private sector. Of course, in the future, we have to cooperate with private sector, as we did with many stakeholders right now. But the development is coming, tourism is there, so e-commerce, e-education, e-services are needed. That's why we stepped in, but it does not mean that we prevent any cooperation with private sector. So we look forward. Maybe private sector was little bit sees this project as a risky project, but in the future we are thinking that we have to push them that this is sustainable and we need to cooperate again in order to connect the unconnected in this digital world. Thank you.
Thank you for your very interesting intervention. So I think now it's time to close the stage and go to our reporters because, okay.
She's going to read the messages right now.
Okay, yeah.
I will be reading all the messages. Does it work? Can you expand it? Is it so we're ready with the messages from our first plenary. I will just read them out, and if there is no objection, it will be posted to the EuroDiG wiki site as the wrap-up of the session. So the first is multi-stakeholder participation proved its viability and sustainability for running the infrastructural projects in remote areas to provide internet access. So is it okay with the audience? No objections? Okay, yeah. The second. The rural areas have less population, but it is the government responsibility to support and promote the demand for internet connection. No objections? Okay. Digital literacy has a high priority for the youngsters and elder generations.
There is an objection.
There is an objection. Actually, the idea is to agree on the statement or remove it from the list, okay? So if you completely object, we remove it.
This is very, very strong statement. I know you want to make it quick, but it's not the core responsibility of the government to make it happen in rural areas. It's like, because it contradicts the first statement.
Yeah.
So then leave it out.
The idea was to inspire the demand. Yes? No?
No. I don't know about the other panelists, but I don't think it's the core responsibility of government to support demand in rural areas. No.
Yeah.
Co-responsibility. Okay, yeah.
Oh.
So we can just remove this if it makes so.
Or add co.
Or add core.
Remove. Okay.
Okay. Just a second. Okay, Raul.
The third. That should be the second. Digital literacy has a high priority for the youngsters and elder generations. We are not allowed to make comments, actually. It should be quick. So it is important to teach people basic digital skills to be competitive in a constantly developing digital world. Any objections?
Let me give a floor to Raul. Just.
Yes, I think that's with regard to the second bullet. Beside the fact that I agree with the comments of my colleagues, but also I think that's one thing that is important, and it has been clear in this debate, is that empowering the community is very important for creating the demand. So it's not that it's the responsibility of the government to create the demand. It's, we have to work together consistently with the first bullet, and in empowering the community for increasing the demand or identifying the needs.
Demand and awareness.
Of course, the government has a responsibility too, as one of the stakeholders.
Okay. Mr. Boni.
I want to add something to the digital literacy because I think it depends on the perspective. In the current perspective, we can say basic digital skills. But when we are looking in the future, so I think it should be rather broad digital skills, yes? Because in the perspective 5-10 years, it will be completely different, much more requirements. And when we are looking at people who are starting education now, so they will go to the labor market, for example, in the perspective of 12 years. So in the perspective of 12 years, I think that basic digital skills will be not sufficient.
Okay, yeah?
Sorry. Just a sec.
I think the second point on the role of the government, the government's core responsibility is extremely important, because if we take away that point, it completely defeats the purpose, because the government comes in when there is market failure, and in rural areas, if you depend only on the community or the private sector, it's not going to work. The government needs to support the private sector. So I'll suggest that we put that point back and make the correction to have it as core responsibility with the government.
Okay, thank you.
So if I'm right to understand, we should put back the second point regarding the role of governments. Okay, I fix it.
Yeah.
And
put it back and add the core responsibility.
The core responsibility, okay. And we have final, not final, but several ones. The community experience and its direct involvement are important to organize investments in the infrastructural projects. Moreover, we should disperse the experience of connecting the unconnected between the communities to help them adjust the working models. Any comments, please? No? No objections, yeah?
No.
Okay. Regulatory and legal framework should be a catalyzer, not an obstacle for investors to contribute to the projects.
Just a second.
Okay.
Yes, I think this bullet should be a catalyzer, not an obstacle for access or for promoting access. It's not only, we are not only talking about investments here.
So to include the access, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Regulatory and legal frameworks should be a catalyzer, not an obstacle for promoting access.
Access, not only the investment.
That's covered also investment and private sector, but not only that. For example, in community-based projects, the most important is access to frequency or this kind of things.
I'm sorry. A little concerned, because I think that we need to express that if we want to have long-term investments, we need to create friendly environment for business or for investment. So if we can add, yes, to that also it requires the friendly environment for investors.
Okay, what about be a catalyzer, not an obstacle for access, and build a friendly environment
for the investors?
We are negotiating here.
So we can continue, yeah?
Okay.
And two final. Community networks and commercial networks are rather complementary to each other, but it depends on a particular rural area and the development project.
Can you change R to can?
What to change?
R to can. Can be.
Can be.
Yes.
Okay. And the final.
So, last one more comment. Because we are not talking only about Georgia, we are talking because we have the Tusheti project in mind, but I would say underserved areas instead of rural. But
what? Could you...
Underserved areas instead of rural areas. As I say, for example, there are other places where...
Not rural, but certain areas. Okay. Underserved. Underserved. Low.
And the final, technologies must fit the needs of the population. It is not enough just to provide an access. Okay.
No objection.
Okay, thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much. Before closing this session, so I would like to say that there is some exhibition of Tushetti project in the corner, so you can enjoy it. And before the closing, we will have the video which Mr. Deputy Minister mentioned. So.
ჩვენ ცენტრი უკვე 1 წელია რაც შეიქმნა კორეის მხარის საქართველოს ტექნოლოგიების და ინოვაციების სააგენტოსა და თბილისის მერიის დახმარებით. ესეთი ცენტრი 50 ქვეყანაში აქვს კორეულ მხარეს გახსნილი, მაგრამ ჩვენთან არის ესეთი პრეცედენტი, რომ უსინათლოებთან მიმართებაში მარტო მუშაობს 3 ქვეყანაში და მათ შორის საქართველოში.
ამ ცენტრში არის ჩამოტანილი თანამედროვე წიგნის წამკითხველი ტექნიკა, რაც გულისხმობს იმას, რომ უსინათლო ადამიანებს ექნებათ შესაძლებლობა აი ამ თანამედროვე ტექნიკასთან ურთიერთობით დაუახლოვდნენ უფრო მეტად წიგნს, რაც მათთვის იქნება ხელშემწყობი როგორც განათლების მიღებაში, ასევე თვითრეალიზაციაში და დასაქმებაში.
ამ აპარატით შეგვიძლია წავიკითხოთ ისეთი წიგნები, რომელიც არ მოგვეპოვება არც კომპიუტერში, არც ბრაილის შრიფტით არ არის და აქ შეიძლება ნებისმიერი წიგნის წაკითხვა.
მადლობას ვუხდით ყველა იმ მესვეულს, ყველა იმ ადამიანს, იმ ტექნოლოგიებისა და ინოვაციის სააგენტო იქნება, მერია იქნება, თვითონ ეს ქართულ კორეული ინფორმაციის დონის ცენტრი აქაურ თანამშრომლებს ყველას, ვინც აი ამ საქმეში თავისი ღვაწლი შეიტანა.
Okay, with this very impressive video. So with this very impressive video, let me thank our distinguished panelists, our audience, and close this session. Thank you very much. Thank you.